Good morning, everybody. My paper is about campus anti-Semitism and issues of freedom of speech in the UK. In September 2015, my group, the Academic Friends of Israel, wrote to all the Vice-Chancellors of all the 143 universities in Britain to remind them of their legal responsibility to maintain a hostile-free environment for Jewish students on campus and to take their complaints of anti-Semitic harassment seriously. We took this action because we were and still are deeply concerned for the safety and well-being of Jewish students, since anti-Semitic incidents have been at record levels in Britain following the 2014 Gaza war and the killings in Paris and Brussels. We only received 20 replies to our letter, which ranged from genuine concern for Jewish students to ones which just noted the contents of our letter. What was very clear from their replies was that their policies and procedures are set up to deal with complaints of harassment from students as individuals and not complaints based on anti-Israel expression, which occurs at campus events such as Israel Apartheid Week. Since sending out the letter, whenever there has been an anti-Israel incident on campus, we have written again to the university concerned and have received mainly positive responses. We have since met with the Vice-Chancellor at King's College in London and will be meeting with Oxford University later this month. Freedom of speech and anti-Semitism is a toxic combination. The outcome of being able to say what you like when it comes to anti-Semitism or Israel is seen by most Jews as hostility and prejudice. The right of freedom of speech is something which the British are very proud of. Freedom of speech is the right to voice one's opinion publicly without fear of censorship or punishment. But freedom of speech does not give you an unfettered right to say absolutely anything, as you have to abide by limitations set by criminal and civil law, as well as fundamental British values such as racial and religious tolerance. The laws relating to freedom of speech in the UK, I imagine, are broadly similar to those here in America, and with one exception, that academics have been granted the legal right to academic freedom. British law considers anti-Semitic incidents to be hate crimes. A hate crime is defined as you see on the screen there. And if you can see immediately that in Britain, because the law classifies what we call as anti-Semitic incidents as hate crimes, anti-Semitism is not a crime as such, nor is Holocaust denial, nor is it against the law to be an anti-Semite per se, nor do we have a legal definition of anti-Semitism, which we have not needed up until now. Freedom of speech also allows one to fabricate the truth and tell lies about Israel and the Jews. So anti-Zionists can freely call for the delegitimization and demonization of Israel and continue to call me a Zionist and a racist as they have done in the past. This may be offensive, but this is political rhetoric and therefore not against the law. The line is only crossed when one calls for violence against Jews, and then it becomes a hate crime. It's perfectly okay to substitute Zionist for Jew or conflate Israel and Jew, because that counts as political rhetoric and not hate speech. This is freedom of speech. Professor Weinberg, the Vice-Chancellor of Kingston University, was recently asked if a Holocaust denier like David Irving would be welcome to speak at his university. His reply was an emphatic certainly. He made it quite clear that as long as the person stayed within British law, then they are welcome to express their views at his university. It was pointed out that David Irving is a convicted Holocaust denier, and the response was that since Holocaust denial is not illegal in Britain, it is just another debating topic, and people who find his views offensive should be more concerned with the debate. After all, he said, Kingston University is a place of learning and people need to be free to debate all topics. He also said he had no problem with a debate on discussing Israel's right to exist, but he did have a problem with a state which is based on a religious ideal. but he failed to mention which country he was actually referring to. Professor Weinberg is within his rights to rule that freedom of speech prevails so long as it doesn't break the law, but he also has to balance his statutory duty to ensure freedom of speech with a legal duty to promote community relations and to prevent campus rhetoric that is polluted by anti-Semitism. There are claims from the left that the British government's Prevent strategy, which aims to confront and rein in radicalisation and extremism on campus, is also threatening freedom of speech because they say it will limit their ability to criticise Israel. In Britain today, out of a student population of 2.3 million, there are 8,500 Jewish students, of whom probably less than 500 are active in pro-Israel engagement. According to the CST, the Community Security Trust, which protects British Jews from anti-Semitism, most students do not encounter anti-Semitism during their time at university. And the CST's own records of anti-Semitic incidents back this up, as they recorded 21 campus-related anti-Semitic incidents in 2015, compared to 19 in 2014 and 9 in 2013. And it's fair to say from these figures that the majority of Jewish students on most UK campuses are not experiencing anti-Semitism. But the CST's figures do not take into account the many campus events where offensive anti-Zionist or anti-Israel rhetoric is used to whip up anti-Israel feeling. Although universities say they are opposed to anti-Semitism, many do not readily accept that anti-Zionist expression can lead to anti-Semitism. Consider the mock military checkpoints that were set up at Cambridge and University College London during Israel Apartheid Week. The aim of the mock checkpoint is to demonise Israel, and people dressed in camouflage, maybe carrying mock guns and even display an Israeli flag. Can you imagine how intimidating this must be for Jewish students? What about the feelings of those Israeli students who have served in the IDF? We can only imagine what a non-Jewish person would feel if they had to walk through the checkpoint. Cambridge University justified granting permission for a checkpoint by equating it with the permission they gave to Jewish students to erect a sukkah during the Jewish festival of Sukkot. One has to ask how UCL could give the go-ahead for a checkpoint when its equality policy states that we wish to foster a positive cultural climate where all staff and students can flourish, where no one will feel compelled to conceal or play down elements of their identity for fear of stigma. Obviously, nobody at UCL considered community relations before they granted permission for their checkpoint. Since the erection of a mock checkpoint is not against the law, freedom of speech is not an issue. So, which is more important? Building campus relations between minority groups or upholding freedom of speech? Apparently it's freedom of speech. Administrators cannot wash their hands from this responsibility because they were complicit in the decision to give the event the go-ahead in the first place. University administrations have to take the lead and set up behavioural norms to ensure minorities, such as Jewish students, are not ostracised. But there's a real problem when we say that some criticism of Israel is anti-Semitic and our complaints are not accepted. In my legal action against my trade union, the UCU, in which I accused them of institutional anti-Semitism, the judgment said, "We're also troubled by the implications of the claim. Underlying it, we sense a worrying disregard for pluralism, tolerance and freedom of expression, principles which the courts and the tribunals are and must be vigilant to protect. Because of my Jewishness, my connection with Israel, it's also my right to say that I'm upset by what I consider to be anti-Semitic comments. This is my opinion and I'm able to say this." But the judge didn't see freedom of speech like that. He seemed to be saying it's okay for me to it's okay to criticise Israel, but it's not acceptable for me to say in response, you've crossed that line into anti-Semitism. So, why am I not allowed my freedom of speech? One event during the last year that seriously tested the principles of freedom of speech and anti-Zionist expression was the conference at Southampton University, which questions Israel's legal and moral right to exist. Southampton is a member of the Russell Group of leading British universities and hosts the Parkes Institute for the Study of Jewish and Non-Jewish Relations, which has long established connections with Anglo-Jewry and is an important repository for Anglo-Jewish archives. Southampton also has a joint cooperation programme with Ben Gurion University. Anglo-Jewry were very concerned about this conference, which was the latest effort by the BDS campaign to use academia as a tool to delegitimise and demonise Israel. The conference organisers were explicit about this in their goal, boasting that the conference is unique because it concerns legitimacy in international law of the Jewish state of Israel. The conference aimed to focus on exploring themes of legitimacy, responsibility and exceptionalism, all of which are posed by Israel's very nature. As Professor Copper said last night, this is a masked form of anti-Semitism. Criticising Israel's policies is acceptable in debate, but denying its right to exist discriminates against the Jewish people, denying them the right to self-determination, which is enshrined in international law. Such historic prejudice lies behind much of BDS activity. Unlike many others, in deference to the principle of freedom of speech, we did not actually call for the cancellation of the conference, nor did we call for a balanced programme. Such bigotry cannot be even-handed. The question of Israel's existence should not be dignified with a response or a defence. We know that one or two speakers intended to support Israel, but in a programme of over 80 speakers, this was sheer tokenism. Instead, we called on Southampton to have the conference relocated so that, from its premises, so that the university and Parkes Institute could regain their credibility and reputation, as well as not appearing to give approval to an event with anti-Semitic overtones. What else made this conference different was the biased call for papers, which would promote pro-Palestinian, anti-Zionist and pro-BDS positions. It is also the majority of speakers were notorious for their anti-Zionist, anti-Israel bias and their defamations of the Jewish state, some of whom equated it with Nazi Germany. Although masquerading as a serious academic conference, this event was nothing more than a 3-day meeting of anti-Israel BDS activists and a thinly veiled attempt to give an academic approval to the Palestinian narrative that the Jewish people have never had a connection with the land of Israel. Southampton's primary concern was freedom of speech, and they were assured initially by the organisers that it was to be a quality academic and balanced event at which speakers would be allowed to present alternative points of view, and that the Parkes Institute would be involved, although they later withdrew. Once Southampton knew that there would be demonstrations organised by Jewish groups with between 400 and 1,000 protesters on campus, they realised that safety and security were an issue if the event was to go ahead. You need to understand that in Britain, since the terrorist acts in Brussels and the hypercash supermarket, any public gathering of a large number of Jews in one place is now thought to be a potential terrorist target. So it was once the university had been advised by the British government security services that this was a possibility, they withdrew their permission, as they were unable to guarantee the safety and security of those attending the conference. The conference organisers protested that the cancellation was an infringement of free speech, but failed to overturn the High Court. By the way, the organisers, one is an Israeli and one is a Palestinian born in Gaza. Why did this one event evoke such a big response from the Jewish community? I think that since the 2014 Gaza war and the targeting of Jews in Paris, Anglo Jewry has been particularly nervous. Also, the leadership of the community were determined to make up for their poor showing at the time of the Gaza war, and this conference was the first opportunity for them and the activist groups to work together. We heard about 2 weeks ago that the conference has now been rescheduled for 2017 on the condition that the organisers pay the costs of security, which is expected to be around £30,000 or about $50,000. The conference organisers are mounting a legal challenge to this financial condition, which is due to be heard in 2 days' time in the High Court in London. The dilemma now facing Anglo Jewry is how to react if the conference goes ahead, because firstly, upholding freedom of speech is the university's primary concern, and it's not an issue because the discussion of Israel's moral and legal right to exist is not against the law. Secondly, none of the protests the university received, such as emails, letters, petitions, or even meetings with the Vice-Chancellor and the Board of Deputies, or even pressure from the university's funders, ultimately had any effect on their decision to withdraw permission for the conference to go ahead. And thirdly, Anglo Jewry does not have a legal definition of contemporary anti-Semitism to call on. But one has to ask, why did Southampton, before giving the event the go-ahead again, did they reconsider its duty of care to Jewish students? Once again, the challenge facing us is how do we convince vice-chancellors that contemporary anti-Semitism is the real thing? We need to make more efforts than we do at present explaining to university administrations what anti-Israel, anti-Zionist expression is and how this impacts on the lives of Jewish students on campus. Whatever happens, it ultimately falls upon Vice-Chancellors and their willingness to take action. As we have seen, universities fall into the trap of confusing their absolute support and implementation of freedom of speech with their role of leadership. They have a duty to impose on their organisation what is acceptable behaviour and what is not, and make sound value judgments within the law. In terms of anti-Israel expression on campus, we have to keep saying, I found your behaviour offensive, and keep saying this until Vice-Chancellors set suitable standards of behaviour to ensure Jewish students and academics can study and work free from intimidation and bullying. There is a twist in this tale because 4 days ago, Sir Eric Pickles MP, the UK's special envoy for post-Holocaust issues, recommended that people seeking a definition of anti-Semitism could use the definition that is included in the College of Policing's hate crime operational guidance. Although their definition, which is based on the EUMC working definition, does not have any legal status, it gives me hope for our future discussions with the universities, especially as the document says, and I quote, "The ongoing political conflict between Israel and Palestine has led to a new anti-Semitism, sometimes also referred to as Anti-Zionism. This is expressed in a system of beliefs, convictions, and political activities focused around the conflict in the Middle East. This form of hostility often blames Jews and/or Israelis for all the tension in the region. Legitimate criticism of Israeli policy is acceptable in a modern free society, but political views do not justify criminality. A crime motivated wholly or partially by such hostility should be recognised as a hate crime." This is an important step forward because, as far as I can see, it's the first time the government has made a statement which contains these points. Let me be clear that many of the incidents that take place on campus, which we would describe as anti-Semitic, would not make these CST figures as hate crimes. If the proposed conference goes ahead, the university need to make it a condition that under freedom of speech, The event can debate Israel's right to exist, but they can't call for Israel's delegitimization or destruction. I would hope that Anglo Jewry would speak with one voice. In my view, they have to take the moral high ground and say, we as Jews find this proposed conference under its present forms of reference offensive and anti-Semitic because it denies Israel's right to exist. And when I mean everyone, I mean the chief rabbi, the community organisations, as well as the activists. My final point. This is the dilemma we face. Should pro-Israel academics be encouraged to participate and interact with the anti-Zionists, which would give the event credibility and implies that as long as Anglo Jewry can speak up for Israel, then the anti-Zionists can say what they like? Or should we be encouraging them to oppose what this conference stands for and have nothing to do with it? Which is better?